Just a few weeks ago, the whole basketball world was in shock after learning James Harden would join Kyrie, Irving, and Kevin Durant in Brooklyn to form one of the most talented trios in league history. That alone made people wonder whether we were about to see the next NBA dynasty come to life right before our eyes. But so far, the Nets have looked like everything but a championship team. If you ask Kyrie, he'll tell you they've looked like an average team. And even though that may sound harsh, it's been entirely true. One night, the Nets will put on a stellar performance on their way to a win against a championship contender. But the following day, they'll allow some of the worst teams in the league to beat them without breaking a sweat. So, what's going on with them? Can we keep blaming their issues on a poor defense, or is it time we take a deeper look at their real problems? Let's talk about it. Building a super team is no easy task from any point you want to see it. Putting three stars together in the same roster requires a lot of time, effort, resources, and even a little bit of luck. We talk about superstars and former MVPs, things become even more complicated. So, we have to acknowledge Sean Mark's work over the last few years. However, creating a super team is only half of the job. And unfortunately, it may not even be the hardest part. Once you acquire so many talented players, you have to find a way to make them all work together while trying to not take away any of the things that made each of their games special. That's a huge challenge on its own. And once you do get it done, you have to be lucky enough so that your players don't go through any injuries or health issues. So far, the Nets haven't met any of those conditions, and that's one of the main reasons why they've been struggling over the last few weeks. Since the Harden trade took place, Brooklyn's Big Three has only played together in 6 games, and that includes a loss against Toronto where Durant was taken off the court after going through one of the strangest episodes regarding the league's health protocols to date. That somehow explains their mediocre record and their inconsistency, but it's not enough to justify how they've been losing. Getting 3 stars to play with each other at a high level takes some time, and getting them to win consistently can take even more time. However, one would assume that players would put on the same level of effort in every game, no matter who they're playing. But that hasn't been the case with the Nets. The team has been at its best when playing against elite competition since the season began. They've already got quality wins against the Bucks, Celtics, Sixers, Jazz, and most recently, the Clippers. And whenever they've defeated one of these teams, the Nets have shown the world why the rest of the league should fear them. But it's been a different story when they've played against the weaker teams in the league. Their defeat at the hands of the Pistons adds to their list of losses against teams under 500. And the problem is that trend didn't start with the Harden trade. It's been like that since the start of the season. But what could be the reason behind their struggles? Well, it's no secret that basketball is a team sport, and while having a few superstars on your roster can make things much easier, you need help from everyone to win the games. Starting the season, Brooklyn arguably had one of the deepest rosters in the league. Along with Irving and Durant, they had multiple players capable of making an impact on both ends of the floor, like Spencer Dinwiddie, Karis LeVert, Jared Allen, and Taurean Prince. And they looked like a juggernaut on the few games where they were at full strength. But unfortunately, that didn't last long. Dinwiddie was lost for the season after playing in only 3 games, and from that moment on, the Nets never looked the same. They couldn't find a way to balance the production of their starting lineup and their bench, and their play suffered a huge blow because of it. So despite having an intimidating 2-game stretch to start the season and counting with 2 of the best players in the world, they started playing like an average team. That's probably what pushed Marks into considering the idea of making a deal to acquire Harden after refusing to accept the Rockets' terms during the offseason. However, adding a former MVP to the roster came at a steep price for the team. Not only the Nets had to surrender all their first-round selections in the draft until 2027 to get Harden, but they also had to part ways with some of their most intriguing prospects, and as a result, their depth was suddenly gone. In theory, all of those assets were at a fair price to pay for the beard. In fact, even Allen acknowledged he would have also made the deal if it had been up to him, and in the few games their Big Three has played together, the Nets have produced some outstanding numbers on one end of the court. Their already excellent offense took another step forward after the trade, and the concerns about 3-ball dominant players not being able to play together have been mostly forgotten, thanks in large part to Harden, who's assumed the main ball handling duties and is leading the league in assists per game for the first time since 2017. However, as good as their offense has been, it's been the exact opposite for their defense. None of the members of the Big Three are known for their stellar defense, but there have been times where they've managed to put solid performances on that end of the floor consistently. During his time as a Warrior, Durant started playing the best defense of his career. With less pressure on the other end of the court, he put on more of his energy in containing opposing players, and more often than not, he did a great job. Irving's deficiencies on defense had been discussed since he came into the league, and while he's not turned into an elite defender, he's learned to hide his weaknesses. On top of that, he's also shown the ability to play at a high level when fully engaged, as he did during the 2016 finals. Harden, on the other hand, remains arguably the weakest defender between the 3 stars, but he's also shown to be capable of putting up some resistance against opposing players when fully committed to it. So, in theory, they should at least be capable of getting a stop when it matters the most. And as surprising as it may sound, well, they've actually done it. In their win against the Clippers, their 13-0 run in the fourth quarter took all of the attention, but their defense was just as important to take the win. They weren't excellent on defense, but they were good enough to get a stop when the game was on the line. That fourth quarter showed us exactly how the Nets plan to win games when the stakes are at their highest. They're going to put together a quick run that will force opponents to match their scoring in the closing minutes. Then they're going to raise the intensity on the defensive end to the point where it becomes impossible for other teams to get comfortable shots. That strategy favors the natural skills of their stars and puts opponents in a tough position. After all, going shot for shot against the trio of Irving, Harden, and Durant is already a difficult task, but doing it with a hand in your face can be almost impossible. And so far, it's worked against the best teams in the league. Currently, the Nets are tied with the Jazz for the best record among games played between teams over 500. Surprisingly, the defense has been solid against such teams. But during the first few weeks of the season, they allowed only 94.5 points against that group and won games by an average of 25 points. Of course, those numbers have come down to earth since then, but it's still evident Brooklyn plays at a much higher level against the best teams. So if defense isn't the real issue, then what's the problem with the Nets? There's no doubt this team has everything they need to win against anyone on any given night. However, they still need to come out and perform like a championship contender. And so far, they haven't done that against a good portion of the league. Despite their excellent performances against the elite teams, to date they have a losing record against teams under 500. And that hasn't had to do with them playing poorly on the defensive end. Of course, having a bottom 10 defense is not a good thing for anybody. But this team in particular is capable of winning games by outscoring opponents and locking down on defense during the closing minutes of the fourth quarter. However, doing that requires a team effort. And when you don't take an opponent seriously because of their record, you're less likely to put up your best effort, especially on defense. In Irving's words, teams that have been too comfortable when playing against them, and that's often resulted in situations where the Nets have to play catch-up for the rest of the game. And he couldn't be more right. Every team in the league will find motivation in playing against a potential championship contender, especially if they feel they're being underestimated. But so far, Brooklyn has failed to match that intensity. With a few exceptions, they haven't been dominant when they were supposed to be, and they've played in far more close games than they should have. Weak teams have taken advantage of that, and perhaps no one's happier about it than the Wizards, who are undefeated against the Nets. And until they realize they need to pay attention to the little things and be fully engaged in every game, they may keep losing close contests against teams with a losing record. In the end, it's evident Brooklyn still needs some time to figure things out. The fact they retooled their roster just a few weeks into the season has made everything more difficult for them, and the lack of chemistry has made them look like an average team. But that's not an acceptable excuse. They're too talented to be playing like this, and despite Steve Nash's inexperience, he's created the right system to get the most out of his players. Now, it depends on them to bring their best every day. And if they don't, well, they may end up resembling last year's Clippers by the end of the season. But now, do you think they'll be able to figure things out? Or will their struggles against the bad teams haunt them in the postseason? Let us know in the comments. We hope you've enjoyed today's video, and if you did, remember to like it and subscribe to our channel for more NBA content. We are Courtside.